Alright, algebra classes, this is Mr. Kim. Make sure you have something to correct with, the correcting pen, red or any other bright color, different from the color of pencil. Also make sure that you have someone else's paper that you traded and put corrected by your CB at the top or bottom. And we're going to get started in about 3, 2, and 1. Alright, here's the homework. Last night, page 27, 28, 6 through 27 every third, and page 34, 35, 15 through 51 every third. It's pretty straightforward. Every problem's with a point here, 21 total. Just a couple things to point out. 51, that's not two answers, it's just one answer, but that's A as the multiple choice answer or 650 as the written answer. If you don't have feet, that's okay, it's not a big deal. Here there's an improper fraction there. If someone wrote it as a mixed number, -1 and 1/10, that's okay. I just prefer improper, but if you wrote it as a mixed number, that's fine. Other than that, one more thing, the Fahrenheit symbol on 27, again, if you don't have it, don't worry too much about it. Other than that, the answers pretty much need to be what I wrote down. So if you have any really deep questions or further questions, you can ask me tomorrow. In any case, teacher, please pause the video at this point, because after this we're going to move on to the lesson. Thank you. Alright guys, hopefully homework is done. You've written 4, 3, or 2 at the top of the page, and get your paper out for notes because we're going to get started. I'll make that happen in 3, 2, and 1. Alright, today's lesson's on multiplying and dividing real numbers. So yesterday was adding, subtracting, negatives and positive, real numbers, fractions, decimals, and integers. Today, same type of numbers, but we are now doing multiplying and dividing. This is lesson 1-6 in your textbook, so it's pretty much following along. And what you will be able to do, or swab at, is know how and when to multiply, divide integers, decimals, fractions, and radicals. Alright, so get that copied down. And we are going to get started. Moving slide in 3, 2, and 1. Okay, so there's basically two rules for multiplying and dividing. Alright? There's two rules, and pretty much only two rules. And it has to do with how many negatives you have. So, here's the two rules. The first rule is if there's an odd number of negatives, you get a negative. That means if you have one negative in the problem, if you've got 3 negatives in the problem, or 5 negatives, or so on, you got a negative answer, whether you're multiplying or dividing. The second rule is that if you have an even number of negatives, you get a positive answer. So in any case, the number of negatives will determine what kind of answer you have. Odd number of negatives means negative answer. Even number of negatives means positive answer. Very, 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 very straightforward. So if you had a random question and there were 80 negatives in the problem and you were multiplying or dividing, at first you wouldn't even care that there were 80 numbers or 80 negatives. The fact that you have 80 negatives means you're going to get a positive answer no matter what. So the number of negatives determines what kind of answer you get. And then you multiply or divide just like you normally do. So we're going to go through a sample set in just a second in 3, 2, and 1. Alright, practice, here we go. First set. Get these 4 written down. We're going to go through them very quickly. Just like what I shared earlier, we're going to go with the rules that I mentioned. Right now I've got 2 negatives in problem 1. So an even number, right? 2 is an even number, so negative times negative is going to be positive, positive 16. You can't see that. Let me change the color real quick. There we go. Over here on number 2, that's really repeated multiplication. That's an exponent. That means you have 4 of these. These negative 3's here, you actually have 4 of them that are being multiplied together. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4 negatives. 1, 2, 3, 4, which means you're going to get a positive answer. And you simply do 3 times 3 times 3 times 3, or 9 and 9 makes 81. And that will be a positive 81. Now, if you go over to number 3, you might think you get the same answer. Oh, I've got 4 negatives and they're all negative 3. That's not the case. Over here, the reason we have 4 negative 3's is because this exponent 4 represents that there's 4 of these exact negative 3's, which is why I wrote them in parentheses. This problem number 3 is actually supposed to be written like this. This problem is actually 3 to the 4th with a negative on the outside. Now, if we go back to PEMDAS, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, or parentheses, exponents. Exponents comes before a negative or minus sign. So what this really means is I'm taking 3 times 3 times 3 times 3, like this. So I do the multiplication, I still get 81, but I have a negative on the outside, so therefore I have negative 81. And this is why parentheses is such a big deal. So even though the problems, number 2 and 3, start off almost identical, this one, because the parentheses is around the whole entire negative 3, ends up being 81. This one without parentheses is really written like this, which means you have a negative 81. This is going to come up on your homework tonight. Please pay attention and focus on these two. We're going to move on to number 4. Don't even worry about the answer. Just figure out how many negatives you have. I see 1 negative. That means no matter what, my answer is going to be a negative. So now it's a matter of just multiplying. 3 times 8 times 2, that's really just 24 times 2, or negative 24 times 2, which turns out to be negative 48. Pretty straightforward. Okay, these problems are going to get a little tougher, but in general, this is what you're going to see tonight. 3, 2, and 1. All right, next problem set. 5, 6, and 7. We're just going to go one by one, so you'll still have time to copy these down. Just start with 5 and go to 6 and go to 7. Here we go, number 5. On this example, remember yesterday we said improper fractions, mixed numbers changed to improper fractions. So this is really negative 8 times 5 over 2. If you're unsure, multiply 2 times 2, add it to the 1. Now put a 1 underneath the negative 8 so that you have two fractions that are being multiplied together. And the beauty about this is you can always check for cross-canceling. You always look diagonally to see if you can reduce. So 5 and 1 can't reduce. 5 and 2 can't reduce. But 8 and 2 can reduce. The number that's going to divide them is going to be 2, right? So 2 goes into 2 one time. 2 goes into negative 8 4 times. And we keep our negative here. Don't lose that. All right? Multiply across to negative 4 times 5, and you get a nice little negative 20. 1 times 1 is 1. Now, you don't leave your answer like this because this is not simplest form. So you write it as an integer, negative 20. And we're done with that one. All right, so let's revisit. Change my mix to an improper. Put a 1 underneath a negative 8 to make them both fractions. And then went and cross-canceled over here, reduced basically. And I get my final answer. Some of you might have just multiplied negative 8 times 5 and 1 times 2. But just remember to reduce at the end. Moving on to problem 6. Here we have 3 negatives. Negative, negative, negative. So no matter what, because 3 is an odd number, I'm going to get a negative in my answer. So all I have to do is worry about multiplying and dividing here. There's an easy way to do this and a hard way to do this. Some of you might actually multiply this 4 and this 13. You get a bigger number, then divide. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to actually check these two right here. Because the problem says I got to multiply, then I got to divide. Well, if I just focus on this set right here, I think I can reduce those two. I think 13 and 26 are divisible by this number, 13. So let's just test on the side. 13 times 2 is 26. So that means 13 is going to go into 13 one time, and then 13 is going to go into 26 two times. Because this is a negative number divided by a negative number, I now have a positive 1 over positive 2, which means all I have to do is worry about this negative 4. I can multiply across this way. That's negative 4. And then I can multiply, or not multiply, but keep my denominator because 2 is underneath. And now I have a negative 2. And I'm done. The long way would have looked like this. You multiply 4 times 13, or negative 4 times negative 13, and you would have gotten 52 divided by negative 26. And when you divide 52 by negative 26, you could end up reducing and you'd still get the same answer. So either way, it's all going to be the same. All right, we'll move on to number 7, last problem for this section. Bunch of negatives here. Not too worried about my negatives right now. Don't say, oh, I've got two negatives here, so Mr. Kim, since you said you have two negatives, that's an even number, so I'm going to get an even answer, a positive answer. Not the case. All of a sudden, we see a plus sign. This plus sign changes things. So now we need to look at these problems individually. 2 times negative 3 is negative 6 plus 8. Do the denominator. 2 times negative 5 is negative 10. Still, I see two negatives. Don't say it's got to be positive. This is not a multiplication division problem anymore because there's a plus sign here. You are now adding or subtracting. The numerator suggests we are subtracting because the signs are different. So you're going to get a 2 over negative 10, which when you reduce gets you negative 1/5. Now, the negative needs to go somewhere. It can either go on the top, on the bottom, or on the side. Anywhere is fine as long as there's at least one negative on the problem, because the problem we reduced had a negative in it. All right, we're going to move along. I hope this is getting pretty easy, or it's not that bad. Next set. And we're going to get right into it. Here we go. So going back to what we did in the beginning, right? Negative 1 to the 5th power. Since there's a parentheses here, that means negative 1 is repeatedly being multiplied. You're going to write down 5 of them. If you need some help, here you go. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Count the number of negatives. I counted 5 negatives. So is the answer going to be negative 5? I hope not. These are all 1s being multiplied. 1 times anything, or I'm sorry, 1 times 1 is 1. 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. So this is a giant 1, except we have a negative because there's an odd number of negatives. There we go. Hope that's not too bad. Here's number 9. Again, we have a negative, no parentheses, so really this problem is actually one of these. Square first, then you do the negative. This is not 8. This is not 4 times 2. It's 4 times 4 with a negative on the outside, so that's going to be negative 16. And lastly, number 10. Number 10. Lots of negative 3's happening here. Parentheses first, there it is, it's by itself. Now I move to exponents, so I'm focusing my attention, and I'll circle it, focusing my attention right here first. Do not multiply this negative 3 with that negative 3, right? It's going to become really bad if you do, all right? So focus on this first. That's negative 3 times negative 3 times negative 3. All right, that's what this is. We still have this negative 3 to deal with. So I'm going to write that in a different color, this negative 3. Now you're going to notice you actually have 4 negative 3's. Right? So that's an even number of negatives, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's going to be a positive answer. And it goes back to the beginning. That's 9. That's 9. 9 times 9 is positive 81. Right? So this is how you multiply and divide with negatives or positives or integers or fractions or decimals. Right? Moving along. Evaluate. We're just going to do a couple problems here. We're not going to do all of them, but just some. Okay, just some of these. So I'm going to have you guys go ahead and write this down. X equals 8, y equals negative 5, and z equals negative 3. All right, we're not going to do all of them. Let's just focus our attention on a couple. Let's do number 2, and let's do number 4. So 2 and 4. We'll focus here. All right? Make sure you substitute correctly. Make sure you use parentheses when you substitute. This is 3 times y is negative 5, so it's 3 times negative 5. Notice how I'm using parentheses whenever I substitute for a variable. Over here, this is minus, and I'm going to open a parentheses here, substitute z. Z is going to be negative 3. Now, some of you might be tempted to do a double negative here and make that a plus or a positive sign. Not so. Got to take care of the exponent first before I do anything with this here, right? Parentheses exponents. So that's going to be negative 15 minus, now let's work this out, negative 3 squared is negative 3 times negative 3. It's 2 of them. It's really negative 3 times negative 3, which is positive 9. So based on this problem, this is really negative 15 minus 9. Signs are the same, so I add. You owe me 15 bucks, you owe me 9 bucks, you owe me or negative 24. All right, so be careful when you substitute. Based on how you substitute, you might not get the correct answer. And if it's all because you start here incorrectly, then you've just wasted a lot of time. We want you to do this part right, so that this part becomes easier. All right, let's do the last one, number 4, and we'll be done. Lots of stuff going on here. A z, x, and y being substituted. So 5 parentheses for the z. Z is -3. We're going to square it. Plus 4. Now, since these letters are together, and there's no sign in between, that's all multiplication. We can do that by using parentheses. X is going to be 8. Y is going to be -5. And then we simply put this positive negative, or plus -8 onto the side here. Plus -8. So, parentheses, exponents. I see exponents. I see a -3 squared. So that's going to be 5 times 9 plus 4 times 8 times -5 plus -8. Now, some of you might be getting confused here because there's a lot of parentheses. Well, do the ones that are next to each other first. So these plus signs here are separating this group, and this group. Though this is by itself, but it's still a group. So that's going to be 45. 4 times 8 times -5, I'll do it real quick with you. That's going to be -160, because that 5 is negative. And then lastly, I have a plus -8. Alright, so since this is all addition or subtraction, you go left to right, right? Just like order of operations does. Left to right like a book. So 45 minus 160 is 160 and a positive 45. We're subtracting. That's going to be -125. Oops, not 140, 125, 115. Alright, so this gives me -115. I'm going to add it to another -8, which the signs are the same, so now I have -123. And that's it. That's pretty much the lesson for today. You guys are going to have the same type of problems tonight for homework. Go ahead and get your books out, get started, work together, get some help, and figure this stuff out. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great day.